Michael Harrison had always prided himself on being an attentive father. In the sprawling suburbs of Denver, Colorado, where cookie-cutter homes lined tree-shaded streets and children rode bikes until the streetlights flickered on, he thought he knew his neighborhood like the back of his weathered hands. More importantly, he thought he knew his daughter Emma better than anyone else in the world. That certainty would soon crumble like autumn leaves beneath his feet. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in late October. Emma, usually a bright ray of sunshine, who bounded down the stairs each morning with her backpack bouncing and her ponytail swinging, moved differently. Her footsteps were measured, careful, as if each step required deliberate thought. Michael glanced up from his coffee and morning newspaper, watching as his 11-year-old daughter methodically placed one foot in front of the other, her usual energy replaced by something he couldn't quite name. "Morning, sweetheart," he called out, folding the paper and setting it aside. Emma's response was barely audible, a whispered greeting that seemed to disappear into the kitchen's warm morning light. She avoided his eyes, focusing instead on the contents of her backpack as she checked and rechecked items that had been organized the night before. Michael felt a familiar flutter in his chest, the same instinct that had served him well during his 20 years as a construction foreman. Something wasn't right, but he couldn't put his finger on exactly what had changed. Before we continue, tell us where you're listening from today in the comments below. If you enjoy stories with unexpected twists and moments of justice, please consider subscribing. Emma's mother, Sarah, had passed away 3 years earlier after a courageous battle with cancer, leaving Michael to navigate the complexities of single parenthood. He had thrown himself into the role with the same dedication he brought to every construction project, learning to braid hair through YouTube videos, mastering the art of packed lunches, and becoming fluent in the unspoken language of preteen emotions. Emma had been his partner in this new life they'd built together, their bond strengthened by shared grief and mutual dependence. That morning, as Michael drove Emma to Roosevelt Elementary School, the silence in the car felt heavier than usual. Emma stared out the passenger window, her small hands fidgeting with the straps of her backpack. The radio played softly in the background, but neither of them seemed to hear it. When they pulled into the school's circular driveway, Emma unbuckled her seatbelt with unusual haste. "Have a great day, Em," Michael said, reaching over to squeeze her shoulder gently. Instead of her typical response, a quick hug and a promise to tell him about her day, Emma simply nodded and slipped out of the car. Michael watched through the rearview mirror as she walked toward the school's main entrance, her posture different somehow, smaller than usual. Other children ran past her, laughing and calling to friends, but Emma moved through them like a ghost, disconnected from the joyful chaos that typically defined the morning rush. The feeling in Michael's chest intensified as he drove to the construction site where his crew was working on a new residential development. All day, as he coordinated deliveries and supervised the installation of drywall, Emma's strange behavior nagged at him. He found himself checking his phone more frequently than usual, half expecting a call from the school. When his lunch break arrived, instead of joining his crew at their usual spot, Michael sat alone in his truck, staring at his phone and debating whether to call Roosevelt Elementary. That evening, Emma's behavior continued to puzzle him. She picked at her dinner, claiming she wasn't hungry, and when he asked about her day, her responses were monosyllabic. Yes, school was fine. No, nothing interesting happened. Yes, she had finished her homework. The vibrant child, who used to regale him with detailed stories about playground adventures and classroom drama, had been replaced by someone who seemed to be going through the motions of being 11 years old. Michael tried to convince himself that this was normal preteen behavior, perhaps the beginning of that mysterious phase he'd heard other parents discuss with knowing looks and weary sighs. But his instincts, honed by years of reading blueprints and anticipating problems before they became disasters, told him this was something more. As he tucked Emma into bed that night, he noticed how she pulled the covers up to her chin and turned away from him more quickly than usual. "Sweet dreams, sweetheart," he whispered, but Emma's response was muffled by her pillow. Michael stood in her doorway for a moment longer, studying the small form beneath the colorful comforter, before quietly closing the door. The pattern continued for the rest of the week. Each morning brought the same careful movements, the same whispered greetings, the same heavy silence during their drive to school. Michael began to pay closer attention to details he might have previously overlooked. Emma's appetite had decreased noticeably. Her favorite meal sat barely touched on her plate. She went to bed earlier without being asked, claiming exhaustion that seemed disproportionate to her usual activities. Friday morning brought a new development that sent alarm bells ringing in Michael's mind. As Emma gathered her things for school, he noticed her favoring her left side, moving with a subtle but unmistakable care that suggested discomfort. When he asked if she was feeling all right, Emma assured him she was fine, but her voice carried a tremor that made his parental radar go into full alert. "Did you hurt yourself yesterday?" Michael pressed gently, crouching down to her eye level. Emma shook her head quickly, perhaps too quickly, and mumbled something about sleeping wrong. But Michael had seen enough injuries on construction sites to recognize the way someone moved when they were protecting a tender spot. His daughter was in pain, and she was trying to hide it from him. During their drive to school that morning, Michael made a decision that would change everything. Instead of dropping Emma off at the main entrance as usual, he parked in the visitor lot and walked her to the school's front doors. He told himself he wanted to see if her behavior was different once she was on school grounds, but deep down he was looking for clues, any sign that might explain the dramatic change in his daughter's demeanor. What he observed made his blood run cold. As they approached the entrance, Emma's entire body language shifted. Her shoulders hunched forward, her pace slowed even further, and she seemed to shrink into herself. Other children rushed past them, eager to start their day, but Emma moved as if she were walking towards something she dreaded. When they reached the doors, she looked up at him with an expression that would haunt him for weeks to come, a mixture of fear and resignation that no 11-year-old should ever have to wear. "I love you, Em," Michael said, fighting to keep his voice steady. Emma nodded and disappeared into the building, but not before he caught sight of tears she was trying desperately to hold back. Michael stood there for several minutes, watching through the glass doors as his daughter walked down the main hallway, her backpack seeming to weigh her down with each step. That afternoon, Michael left the construction site early, something he rarely did unless there was an emergency. He arrived at Roosevelt Elementary 20 minutes before dismissal, positioning himself where he could observe the school's exits without being immediately noticed. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but every instinct he possessed told him that answers lay somewhere within those brick walls. When the final bell rang and children began streaming out of the building, Michael scanned the crowd for Emma. She emerged from the main entrance several minutes later, alone and walking with the same careful gait he'd noticed that morning. But what captured his attention was the boy who followed about 10 feet behind her, flanked by 2 other children. Michael couldn't hear what they were saying, but their posture and movements suggested they were taunting Emma, who quickened her pace toward the pickup area. Michael's hands clenched into fists as he watched his daughter hurry toward their usual meeting spot, her head down and her shoulders rigid with tension. The boys behind her eventually veered off in a different direction, but not before one of them made a gesture that looked distinctly threatening. By the time Emma reached the car, she had composed herself enough to offer Michael a weak smile, but he could see the relief in her eyes at being safely away from the school grounds. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Michael asked as they drove home, his voice carefully neutral despite the storm of emotions churning in his chest. Emma's response was the same as it had been all week. "Fine. Nothing special. Just a normal day." But Michael had seen enough to know that Emma's days at Roosevelt Elementary were anything but normal. Something was happening to his daughter at school, something that was slowly but systematically destroying the confident, joyful child he had raised. That evening, as Emma went through the motions of her bedtime routine, Michael sat at his kitchen table staring at his phone. He had the school's number programmed into his contacts, and several times he started to dial before stopping himself. What would he say? That he had a feeling something was wrong? That his daughter seemed different? Without concrete evidence, would anyone take his concerns seriously? As he wrestled with these questions, Michael heard a sound that made his decision for him. From upstairs, barely audible through Emma's closed bedroom door, came the muffled sound of crying. Not the dramatic tears of a child who had been denied something she wanted, but the quiet, heartbroken sobs of someone who was trying not to be heard. Michael crept up the stairs and stood outside Emma's room, his heart breaking with each barely contained sob. He knew then that whatever was happening at Roosevelt Elementary had gone far beyond normal childhood challenges. His daughter was suffering, and she was suffering alone. As a father, as the only parent Emma had left, Michael knew he had to act. The time for waiting and wondering had passed. Tomorrow, he would find out exactly what was happening to his little girl, no matter what it took. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually filled Michael with energy and purpose. Today, however, it felt different. As he sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands, Michael's mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Emma was still sleeping, and for the first time in days she looked peaceful, her face relaxed in a way that broke his heart because it reminded him of how she used to look all the time. Michael had spent most of Friday night researching Roosevelt Elementary School online, looking for any information that might shed light on Emma's situation. The school's website was filled with cheerful photos of smiling children and dedicated teachers, along with glowing testimonials from parents about the nurturing environment. Nothing he found suggested any problems, which only deepened his frustration. Whatever was happening to Emma seemed to be invisible to the outside world. When Emma finally emerged from her bedroom, she moved with the same careful deliberation that had become her trademark over the past week. Michael watched as she descended the stairs, noting how she gripped the handrail more tightly than necessary and paused slightly on each step. The protective posture he'd noticed was becoming more pronounced, as if she were guarding against some invisible threat. "Morning, sweetheart," Michael said, setting down his coffee and giving her his full attention. "How did you sleep?" Emma's response was non-committal, but he noticed dark circles under her eyes that suggested sleep had been elusive. As she moved around the kitchen preparing her cereal, Michael made a mental note of every wince, every careful movement, every sign that his daughter was not the healthy, carefree child she should be. Over breakfast, Michael attempted to engage Emma in conversation about school, but his questions were met with the same vague responses she'd been giving all week. When he asked about her friends, Emma's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and for just a moment, her carefully constructed facade slipped. Michael saw fear flash across her features before she quickly recovered and mumbled something about everyone being fine. "Em," Michael said gently, reaching across the table to cover her small hand with his much larger one. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? If something is bothering you, or if someone is giving you trouble, I want to help." Emma's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away, and for a moment, Michael thought she might finally open up to him. Instead, she pulled her hand away and excused herself from the table, claiming she needed to work on a project for school. That afternoon, as Emma sat in the living room with her homework spread across the coffee table, Michael made a decision that would prove to be the turning point in their ordeal. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for Roosevelt Elementary School. When the automated system answered, he pressed the option for the principal's office and waited, his heart pounding with a mixture of determination and anxiety. "Roosevelt Elementary, this is Mrs. Patterson speaking," came the warm voice of the school secretary. Michael introduced himself as Emma Harrison's father and asked if he could schedule a meeting with Principal Martinez to discuss some concerns about his daughter. Mrs. Patterson was accommodating and understanding, offering him an appointment first thing Monday morning. As Michael hung up the phone, he felt a small sense of relief. At least now he was taking action. Sunday brought a new revelation that solidified Michael's resolve to get to the bottom of Emma's situation. While doing laundry, he discovered Emma's school clothes from the previous week, and what he found made his blood boil. Several of her shirts had small tears near the seams, damage that looked deliberate rather than accidental. One of her favorite sweaters had what appeared to be food stains that had been hastily scrubbed but not entirely removed. Most disturbing of all, he found grass stains on the knees of her jeans and dirt embedded in the fabric that suggested she had been on the ground against her will. Michael sat on his laundry room floor, holding his daughter's damaged clothing and feeling a rage unlike anything he had ever experienced. Someone was hurting his little girl, and she had been suffering in silence, trying to protect him from the truth, or perhaps afraid that he wouldn't believe her. The thought that Emma had been enduring this alone while he remained oblivious made him feel like he had failed in his most important job as her father. That evening, as they sat together watching a movie, Michael studied Emma's profile in the flickering light from the television. She sat curled in the corner of the couch, her knees drawn up to her chest in a protective posture that had become all too familiar. When a scene in the movie showed children being mean to another child, Emma visibly tensed, and Michael saw her jaw clench as if she were reliving her own experiences. "Emma," Michael said softly, muting the television, "I want you to know that no matter what's happening, no matter what anyone has told you, you are loved, and you are safe with me. If someone is hurting you or making you feel scared, that's not your fault, and we can fix it together." Emma's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Michael thought she might finally tell him everything. Instead, She leaned against his shoulder and whispered that she loved him too, but she offered nothing more about what was tormenting her. As Michael tucked Emma into bed that night, he made her a promise that he would keep, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. "Tomorrow is going to be a better day," he told her, smoothing her hair away from her face. "Daddy's going to make sure of that." Emma nodded, but the doubt in her eyes suggested that she had given up hope that anything could change. Michael kissed her forehead and quietly closed her bedroom door, but he stood in the hallway for several minutes, listening to make sure she was settling down for sleep. In his own bedroom, Michael lay awake, planning his approach for the meeting with Principal Martinez. He would present his observations calmly and rationally, focusing on the changes in Emma's behavior and the physical evidence he had discovered. He would demand answers and, more importantly, demand action. Whatever was happening at Roosevelt Elementary School, whatever dark secret Emma was carrying, Michael was determined to expose it and put an end to his daughter's suffering once and for all. Monday morning arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to mirror the frost that had settled over Emma's usual cheerful demeanor. As Michael prepared for what he hoped would be a crucial meeting with Principal Martinez, he noticed that Emma moved even more carefully than usual, wincing slightly as she reached for her backpack. The sight of his daughter, in obvious discomfort while trying to hide it from him, strengthened his resolve to get answers, no matter how uncomfortable those answers might be. The drive to Roosevelt Elementary was quiet, but it felt different from the heavy silences of the previous week. Today, Michael was armed with purpose and determination. He had spent the early morning hours organizing his thoughts and observations, creating a mental timeline of Emma's behavioral changes and the physical evidence he had discovered. As they pulled into the school's parking lot, Michael squeezed Emma's hand gently. "I'll see you this afternoon, sweetheart," he said, his voice carrying a confidence he hoped would reassure her. Emma nodded, but seemed reluctant to leave the safety of the car. As Michael watched her walk toward the school building, he noticed several other children near the entrance, and his attention was immediately drawn to a group of 3 boys who seemed to be watching Emma's approach with interest. One of them, a larger boy with sandy brown hair, made a gesture to his companions that made them laugh, and Michael felt his jaw clench with suppressed anger. After dropping Emma off, Michael drove to a nearby coffee shop to kill time before his appointment. He couldn't concentrate on the newspaper he'd brought, or the emails accumulating on his phone. Instead, he found himself staring out the window, running through various scenarios of what Principal Martinez might tell him. Would the school be aware of bullying? Would they be defensive and dismissive of his concerns? Or worse, would they already know about problems but have failed to address them adequately? At exactly 9 o'clock, Michael walked through the front doors of Roosevelt Elementary and announced himself to Mrs. Patterson. The school secretary was as warm and welcoming in person as she had been on the phone, but Michael noticed her smile seemed slightly forced, as if she were preparing for a difficult conversation. Principal Martinez appeared a few minutes later, a tall woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to radiate genuine concern. "Mr. Harrison, thank you for coming in," Principal Martinez said, extending her hand. "I understand you have some concerns about Emma. Please, come into my office so we can discuss this privately." As they walked down the hallway, Michael noticed several classroom doors standing open, revealing children engaged in their morning lessons. The scene looked normal and peaceful, which only deepened the mystery of what was happening to Emma during her school days. Principal Martinez's office was decorated with children's artwork and photos from various school events, creating an atmosphere that should have been comforting. As they settled into chairs across from each other, Michael took a deep breath and began to outline his concerns. He described Emma's dramatic behavioral changes, her apparent physical discomfort, the damaged clothing he'd discovered, and his observations of her interactions with other students. "I have to be honest, Mr. Harrison," Principal Martinez said when he finished, her expression thoughtful and concerned. "Emma's teachers have mentioned that she seems withdrawn lately, but we haven't received any reports of specific incidents or problems. However, what you're describing sounds very troubling, and I want to investigate this thoroughly." Michael felt a mixture of relief that his concerns were being taken seriously and frustration that the school hadn't already noticed the severity of the situation. Principal Martinez pulled out Emma's file and reviewed her academic performance and any behavioral notes from her teachers. "Emma's grades have remained stable, which sometimes masks other issues," she explained. Children who are being bullied often try to maintain their academic performance to avoid additional negative attention. Let me call in Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's teacher, and Mr. Thompson, our guidance counselor. They may have observations that haven't made it into the official records. While they waited for the teacher and counselor to arrive, Principal Martinez asked Michael more specific questions about Emma's behavior at home. She wanted to know about changes in her sleep patterns, appetite, and social interactions outside of school. Michael found himself describing a child who had gradually withdrawn from activities she once enjoyed, who seemed to be living in a constant state of low-level anxiety, and who was clearly hiding something significant from the person she trusted most. When Mrs. Rodriguez arrived, her immediate expression of concern told Michael that she had indeed noticed changes in Emma. "Emma has always been one of my most engaged students," the teacher explained, settling into the chair beside Principal Martinez. "But over the past few weeks, she's become increasingly quiet and seems reluctant to participate in group activities. I've noticed her avoiding certain areas of the playground during recess, and she often asks to stay inside to help with classroom tasks instead of going outside." Mr. Thompson, the guidance counselor, added his own observations that painted an even more troubling picture. "I've seen Emma in the hallways between classes, and she definitely appears to be taking routes that avoid certain areas of the school. Last week, I noticed her eating lunch alone in the library instead of in the cafeteria with her peers. When I approached her to ask if everything was all right, she assured me she just preferred the quiet environment, but her body language suggested otherwise." The three adults sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications of what they had just shared. It was clear that Emma was systematically avoiding normal social interactions and common areas of the school, behavior that strongly suggested she was trying to evade someone or something that made her feel unsafe. Principal Martinez leaned forward, her expression serious and determined. "Mr. Harrison, I want to assure you that we take these concerns very seriously. I'm going to initiate a thorough investigation immediately, and I'll be personally monitoring Emma's situation throughout the day. We'll also be reviewing security footage from the areas where incidents might have occurred and interviewing students who may have witnessed something." Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him, finally convinced that Emma would receive the protection and support she deserved. As the meeting concluded, Principal Martinez walked Michael to the front entrance, promising to call him with updates throughout the day. "We will get to the bottom of this," she assured him, her handshake firm and confident. "Emma is lucky to have a father who pays such close attention and advocates for her well-being." As Michael walked to his car, he felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in weeks. The wheels of justice were finally in motion, and soon Emma would be free from whatever had been tormenting her. Michael's optimism was short-lived. By noon, his phone rang with a call from Principal Martinez that would shatter any hope for a simple resolution to Emma's problems. Her voice carried a gravity that immediately put him on high alert, and her request that he come to the school immediately sent his heart racing. As he left the construction site and drove through Denver's midday traffic, Michael's mind conjured increasingly dark scenarios about what the investigation might have uncovered. When he arrived at Roosevelt Elementary, the atmosphere felt different from his morning visit. Mrs. Patterson's usual warm demeanor was replaced by professional concern, and Principal Martinez appeared in the lobby within minutes of his arrival. "Mr. Harrison, thank you for coming so quickly. We need to discuss some very serious developments, and I think it would be best if we involve the school district's crisis intervention team and possibly local authorities." The walk to Principal Martinez's office felt interminable, and Michael's construction worker instincts were screaming that he was about to hear something that would fundamentally change his understanding of what his daughter had been enduring. When they entered the office, Michael was surprised to find two additional people waiting: Detective Sarah Chen from the Denver Police Department's Juvenile Division, and Dr. Amanda Foster, a child psychologist who specialized in school-based trauma. "Mr. Harrison, please sit down," Principal Martinez said gently. "What we've discovered today requires careful handling, and we want to make sure Emma receives all the support she needs." Detective Chen leaned forward, her expression serious but compassionate. "We've been conducting interviews with students and reviewing security footage, and we've uncovered evidence of systematic bullying that goes far beyond what any child should have to endure." Michael felt his world tilt as Detective Chen began to outline what the investigation had revealed. A group of 3 sixth-grade boys, led by a student named Tyler Morrison, had been targeting Emma for weeks with increasingly aggressive behavior. What had started as verbal taunting had escalated to physical intimidation, property destruction, and what could only be described as psychological warfare designed to isolate Emma from her peers and make her afraid to seek help. The security footage shows several incidents where Emma was cornered in areas with limited supervision. Detective Chen continued, "The boys have been taking her lunch money, damaging her belongings, and using threats of worse consequences to keep her silent. They told her that if she reported their behavior, they would make sure she regretted it." Michael's hands clenched into fists as he imagined his daughter being terrorized by children who should have been her peers and playmates. Dr. Foster interjected with information that made Michael's blood boil. One of the tactics they used was particularly cruel and psychologically damaging. They told Emma that her mother's death was her fault, and that if she caused trouble at school, something bad might happen to you as well. They exploited her greatest fear, losing her remaining parent, to ensure her compliance with their demands. The room fell silent as the full weight of the boys' psychological manipulation became clear. Principal Martinez pulled out a folder containing witness statements and documentation that painted a picture of sustained abuse that had been carefully hidden from adult supervision. They were strategic about when and where they approached Emma, she explained. They targeted her during transitions between classes, in bathroom areas, and in corners of the playground, where security cameras had limited visibility. Several students witnessed these incidents, but were too afraid to report them, because Tyler Morrison has a reputation for retaliation. Michael struggled to process the magnitude of what his daughter had been enduring while maintaining her grades and trying to appear normal at home. The emotional strength it must have taken for an 11-year-old to carry this burden alone was incomprehensible. "Where is Emma now?" he asked, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "Is she safe?" "Emma is currently with our school nurse, and we've arranged for her to spend the remainder of the day in a secure area away from the other students," Principal Martinez assured him. "We've also separated the 3 boys involved and contacted their parents for immediate conferences. This situation requires swift and decisive action to ensure Emma's safety and begin the process of helping her heal from this trauma." Detective Chen outlined the legal implications of what had been uncovered. While the boys were minors, their behavior constituted harassment, theft, and potentially assault charges that would need to be addressed through both the school district's disciplinary procedures and the juvenile justice system. "We'll need to conduct a formal interview with Emma to document her experiences, and we'll want to do that with you present and with Dr. Foster available to provide support." Dr. Foster explained the psychological impact that sustained bullying could have on a child Emma's age, particularly given the recent loss of her mother. Children who experience this type of systematic abuse often develop anxiety, depression, and trust issues that can affect their academic performance and social development. Emma has shown remarkable resilience by maintaining her grades and trying to protect you from her pain, but she'll need professional support to process what she's experienced. As the meeting continued, Michael learned details about Emma's ordeal that broke his heart and filled him with rage in equal measure. The boys had forced her to hand over her lunch money by threatening to hurt other students if she refused. They had destroyed school projects she'd worked hard to complete, telling her that losers like her didn't deserve good grades. Most devastatingly, they had used her mother's memory as a weapon, suggesting that Sarah would be ashamed of having such a weak daughter. "I want to see Emma," Michael said finally, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil churning inside him. "And I want these boys held accountable for what they've done to her. No child should have to endure what my daughter has been through, and I won't stand for it being brushed aside as normal childhood behavior." The determination in his voice left no doubt that he would fight for Emma with every resource at his disposal. Principal Martinez nodded approvingly. "We share your commitment to ensuring justice for Emma, Mr. Harrison. The 3 students involved will face serious disciplinary action, including suspension and mandatory counseling. We're also implementing additional supervision measures and reviewing our anti-bullying protocols to prevent similar situations from occurring in the future." As they prepared to bring Emma into the conversation, Michael steeled himself for what would be one of the most difficult conversations of his life, knowing that his daughter's healing journey was just beginning. When Emma entered Principal Martinez's office, Michael's heart shattered at the sight of his daughter's pale, frightened face. She looked smaller than her 11 years, her shoulders hunched defensively as her eyes darted around the room, taking in the assembled adults. When she spotted her father, relief flooded her features, and she rushed to his side, burying her face against his chest as tears she had been holding back for weeks finally began to flow. "I'm sorry, Daddy," Emma whispered through her sobs. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. They said something bad would happen to you if I talked, and I couldn't lose you too." Michael wrapped his arms around his daughter, his own eyes filling with tears as he realized the impossible burden she had been carrying. The boys had weaponized her greatest fear, losing her remaining parent, to ensure her silence about their abuse. Dr. Foster moved her chair closer, speaking in gentle tones that seemed to calm Emma slightly. "Emma, you have absolutely nothing to apologize for. What happened to you was wrong. And none of it was your fault. The boys who were hurting you made bad choices, and now the adults are going to make sure they face consequences for those choices." Emma nodded against her father's chest but remained clinging to him as if he were her lifeline in a turbulent sea. Detective Chen waited patiently for Emma to compose herself before beginning her gentle questioning. Her years of experience interviewing traumatized children were evident as she used age-appropriate language and took frequent breaks when Emma became overwhelmed. Slowly, painfully, the full scope of the boys' campaign of terror began to emerge. They had targeted Emma not randomly, but specifically because her mother's death had made her vulnerable and isolated. "They said Mom died because I was a bad daughter," Emma revealed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tyler said that's why I didn't have any friends now, because everyone knew I was cursed and bad things happened to people who got close to me." Michael felt rage building in his chest as he realized how the boys had twisted Emma's grief into a weapon against her, using her natural tendency to blame herself for her mother's death as a foundation for their psychological abuse. The interview revealed systematic patterns of abuse that had escalated over time. What began as name-calling and exclusion had progressed to theft, property destruction, and physical intimidation. The boys had cornered Emma in bathroom stalls, trapped her in empty classrooms during lunch, and created a climate of fear that made her afraid to participate in normal school activities. They had even recruited other students to isolate her, spreading rumors that she was weird and dangerous to be around. "They made me give them my lunch money every day," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger as she realized the adults were listening and believing her story. "If I didn't have money, they would take things from my backpack and throw them in the trash or break them. Last week, Tyler pushed me down on the playground and said next time it would be worse if I didn't bring more money." The physical evidence Michael had noticed, the torn clothes, the grass stains, Emma's careful movements, finally made sense. Dr. Foster helped Emma articulate feelings she had been unable to express, creating a safe space for her to describe the constant anxiety and fear that had become her daily reality. Emma revealed that she had stopped eating lunch most days because the boys had made the cafeteria a place of terror, preferring to hide in the library where she felt safer. She had avoided playground activities, group projects, and social events because Tyler's group had threatened to humiliate her in front of other students. "The worst part," Emma said, looking up at her father with eyes that seemed far too old for her face, "was when they said you would get hurt like Mom did if I told anyone. I couldn't let that happen, Daddy. I couldn't lose you too." Michael's heart broke as he realized that Emma had been trying to protect him by suffering in silence, sacrificing her own well-being to ensure his safety in her mind. Principal Martinez took detailed notes as Emma's story unfolded, documenting each incident for the disciplinary proceedings that would follow. The pattern of abuse was clear and systematic, with the three boys working together to maximize Emma's isolation and fear. They had been careful to avoid areas with heavy supervision, timing their attacks for maximum psychological impact while minimizing the risk of discovery by adults. Detective Chen explained to Emma that what the boys had done was against the law and that there would be consequences for their actions. "You were very brave to tell us what happened," she assured Emma, "and now we can make sure this doesn't happen to you or any other student. The boys are going to have to answer for what they did, and they're going to get help to learn better ways to treat people." As the interview concluded, Dr. Foster discussed the next steps for Emma's emotional recovery. "What you've experienced is called trauma, Emma, and it's normal to feel scared and confused after something like this happens. But with support from your dad and from counselors, you can feel safe and happy again. It's going to take time, but you don't have to carry these feelings alone anymore." Emma nodded, seemingly relieved to learn that her emotional turmoil had a name and could be addressed. Michael felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Emma had endured while he remained oblivious to her suffering. As they prepared to leave the school, he made a silent promise to himself and to his daughter that he would never again allow her to face such challenges alone. The boys responsible for Emma's trauma would face justice, but more importantly, Emma would receive all the love, support, and professional help she needed to heal from this ordeal. Principal Martinez walked them to the parking lot, assuring Michael that the 3 boys had been suspended pending a full disciplinary hearing and that additional measures would be implemented immediately to ensure Emma's safety when she returned to school. As they drove home, Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at her father as if to reassure herself that he was still there, still safe, still committed to protecting her from anyone who might try to hurt her again. The days following Emma's revelation brought a whirlwind of activity as the school district, law enforcement, and mental health professionals worked together to address the situation comprehensively. Michael took time off from work to focus entirely on Emma's needs, arranging counseling sessions with Dr. Foster and ensuring that his daughter felt safe and supported as she began to process the trauma she had endured. The transformation in Emma's demeanor was remarkable once the burden of secrecy had been lifted from her small shoulders. Tyler Morrison and his 2 companions faced serious consequences for their actions. The school district's investigation revealed that their behavior constituted harassment, theft, and assault under both school policy and state law. Tyler, as the apparent ringleader, faced suspension for the remainder of the school year, mandatory anger management counseling, and enrollment in a program designed to educate young offenders about the impact of bullying on their victims. His parents, initially defensive and dismissive, became more cooperative once they realized the legal implications of their son's behavior. Detective Chen filed formal charges through the juvenile justice system, ensuring that the boys would face appropriate consequences, while also receiving the intervention services they needed to change their behavior patterns. The other 2 boys, Marcus and Dylan, received lesser but still significant consequences, including suspension, mandatory counseling, and community service hours that would be served helping younger children understand the importance of kindness and inclusion. The investigation also revealed systemic issues within Roosevelt Elementary's supervision and reporting protocols that had allowed the bullying to continue undetected for so long. Principal Martinez implemented immediate changes, including increased monitoring of transition areas, mandatory training for all staff on recognizing signs of bullying, and the establishment of anonymous reporting systems that would make it easier for students to seek help without fear of retaliation. Emma's return to school was carefully orchestrated to ensure her safety and comfort. Dr. Foster worked with the school to create a gradual reintegration plan that allowed Emma to rebuild her confidence in the school environment step by step. She started with shortened days, accompanied by a counselor, and gradually worked up to full participation as her anxiety decreased and her sense of security returned. The healing process was not linear or simple. Emma experienced nightmares, anxiety attacks, and periods of regression that tested both her resilience and Michael's patience. There were days when she begged not to go to school, mornings when she would wake up with stomach aches that were clearly psychosomatic but no less real for being emotionally based. Michael learned to recognize the triggers that would send Emma spiraling back into fear and developed strategies to help her work through those difficult moments. Dr. Foster explained that Emma's recovery would involve processing not just the recent bullying, but also her unresolved grief over her mother's death, which the boys had cruelly exploited. Trauma often layers on top of existing vulnerabilities. The psychologist explained to Michael during one of their parent consultation sessions, Emma was already dealing with loss and the fear of abandonment when these boys targeted those exact emotional wounds. Her healing will need to address both the bullying and the underlying grief. The community response to Emma's situation was overwhelmingly supportive. Other parents came forward with their own concerns about bullying at the school, leading to district-wide policy reviews and improvements. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, worked closely with Michael and Dr. Foster to create a classroom environment where Emma felt safe to participate and rebuild her academic confidence. The school counselor, Mr. Thompson, checked in with Emma daily during her first weeks back, providing a consistent adult presence she could rely on. As weeks turned into months, Michael watched his daughter slowly but steadily reclaim pieces of herself that had been stolen by Tyler and his accomplices. Emma began participating in classroom discussions again. Tentatively at first, but with growing confidence. She made new friends among classmates who had been horrified to learn what she had endured and wanted to show their support. Most importantly, she began to trust that the adults in her life would protect her, and that she didn't need to face her problems alone. The legal proceedings moved through the juvenile court system with appropriate gravity and attention to both justice and rehabilitation. Tyler Morrison's family was required to pay restitution for Emma's damaged property and medical expenses related to her counseling, while Tyler himself was ordered to complete community service and participate in a victim impact program that would help him understand the real consequences of his actions. The judge handling the case made it clear that bullying behavior would not be tolerated and that future incidents would result in more severe consequences. Michael's relationship with Emma deepened as they worked through the trauma together. He learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when she was struggling and developed new ways to communicate that made her feel safe expressing her fears and concerns. Their evening conversations became sacred time, where Emma could process her day and Michael could provide the reassurance and support she needed to continue healing. One particularly meaningful moment came about 3 months after the initial revelation, when Emma approached Michael with a request that surprised him. "Daddy, I want to talk to other kids who might be getting bullied like I was. Dr. Foster says sometimes it helps to share your story so other people don't feel so alone." Michael was amazed by his daughter's resilience and her desire to transform her painful experience into something that could help others facing similar challenges. Working with the school district and Dr. Foster, Emma began participating in anti-bullying presentations for younger students, sharing her story in age-appropriate ways that emphasized the importance of seeking help and the reality that bullying was never the victim's fault. Her courage in speaking publicly about her experience became an inspiration to other children who had been suffering in silence, and several students came forward to report bullying situations that might otherwise have continued unaddressed. The healing process also involved rebuilding Emma's relationship with school as a place of learning and social connection rather than fear and isolation. Mrs. Rodriguez worked with Emma to identify new interests and activities that would help her form positive associations with the school environment. Emma joined the art club and discovered a talent for watercolor painting that became a healthy outlet for expressing emotions that were sometimes too complex for words. 1 year later, Michael stood in the auditorium of Roosevelt Elementary School watching his daughter address a packed room of parents, students, and educators about the importance of speaking up against bullying. Emma's voice was clear and confident as she shared her story, transformed from a tale of victimization into a powerful message about resilience, community support, and the courage required to seek help when facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. "When the bullying first started, I thought I had to handle it by myself," Emma told the audience, her poise remarkable for a 12-year-old who had endured so much. "I was afraid that asking for help would make things worse or that the adults in my life might get hurt because of me. But I learned that keeping secrets about people hurting you only makes the hurt bigger and stronger. When I finally told my dad and the teachers what was happening, everything started to get better." Michael felt tears of pride welling in his eyes as he listened to his daughter speak with such wisdom and maturity about her experience. The transformation from the frightened, withdrawn child he had worried about to this confident young advocate was nothing short of miraculous. Dr. Foster had explained that for many trauma survivors, finding ways to help others facing similar challenges became an integral part of their own healing process, and Emma exemplified this phenomenon perfectly. The anti-bullying program that Emma had helped develop was now being implemented throughout the Denver School District, with her story serving as a centerpiece for discussions about the importance of adult intervention and peer support. Roosevelt Elementary had become a model for other schools seeking to create environments where students felt safe reporting harassment and where swift, appropriate action could prevent situations from escalating to the level Emma had endured. Tyler Morrison, now attending a different school as part of his disciplinary consequences, had made significant progress in anger management counseling and had written a heartfelt apology letter to Emma acknowledging the harm he had caused. While Emma was not required to forgive him, she had chosen to accept his apology as part of her own healing journey, demonstrating a maturity and compassion that continued to amaze the adults working with her. "The most important thing I want other kids to know," Emma continued her presentation, "is that if someone is being mean to you, threatening you, or hurting you, it's not your fault, and you don't have to face it alone. There are adults who care about you and want to help, but they can't help if they don't know what's happening. Being brave enough to ask for help isn't being weak. It's being smart and protecting yourself and other kids who might get hurt too." After the presentation, Michael and Emma were approached by several families whose children had found the courage to report bullying situations after hearing Emma's story. One mother, tears streaming down her face, thanked Emma for giving her son the words to describe what he had been experiencing at school. A father shook Michael's hand and expressed gratitude for their willingness to share such a personal and painful experience for the benefit of other children. The evening concluded with a ceremony recognizing Emma's contributions to improving school safety and her advocacy work with younger students. Principal Martinez presented her with a special award acknowledging her courage and leadership, while Dr. Foster spoke about the remarkable healing journey Emma had undertaken and her transformation from victim to advocate. As they drove home from the ceremony, Emma chatted excitedly about the positive responses she had received and her plans to continue speaking at other schools about bullying prevention. Michael marveled at how his daughter had not only recovered from her trauma, but had found ways to use her experience to protect and empower other children facing similar challenges. "Daddy," Emma said as they pulled into their driveway, "I know Mom can't be here to see this, but I think she would be proud of how we handled everything together. We didn't let the bad things that happened make us weak or scared forever. We used them to become stronger and help other people." Michael's heart swelled with pride and love for this remarkable young woman who had taught him as much about courage and resilience as he had taught her about the importance of speaking truth to power. That night, as Michael tucked Emma into bed, she no longer pulled the covers over her head or turned away from him as she had during the darkest days of her ordeal. Instead, she looked directly at him with clear, confident eyes and said, "Thank you for not giving up on figuring out what was wrong, even when I couldn't tell you. Thank you for protecting me and helping me feel safe again." Michael kissed her forehead and realized that while he had saved Emma from her bullies, she had saved him from the guilt and helplessness that would have consumed him if her suffering had continued unaddressed. The dark secret that had nearly destroyed Emma's childhood had ultimately revealed the strength of their father-daughter bond and the power of community support in healing trauma. Emma's story had become a beacon of hope for other families facing similar challenges, demonstrating that with courage, persistence, and the right support systems, even the most devastating experiences could be transformed into opportunities for growth, healing, and positive change. As Michael turned off Emma's bedroom light and headed to his own room, he reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that first Tuesday morning, when he noticed something different about his daughter's behavior. His father's intuition had served them well, leading him to uncover a situation that could have had devastating long-term consequences if left unaddressed. Most importantly, Emma had learned that she was never alone in facing life's challenges, and that the adults who loved her would always fight to protect her safety and well-being. The journey from that dark period to Emma's current role as an advocate and survivor had taught both father and daughter valuable lessons about the importance of communication, the power of seeking help, and the remarkable resilience of the human spirit when supported by love and community. Emma's transformation from victim to victor served as a powerful reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope and healing remain possible with the right support and determination to never give up on the people we love most. What moment in this story resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this narrative, please subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world to me and helps keep these stories coming.